insane comparison today, guys. We have a 997.1 GT3. We have a 997.2 GT3 RS, the 3.8 liter. And we have a 997.2 GT3 RS 4.0. Three-way comparison, 397 Porsches, the pinnacle, and we're starting with this. This is the 997.1 GT3, only modifications, Sharkworks bypass, sounds amazing by the way, Ferodo DS2500 brake pads, OZ Racing wheels, we have this roll bar, road and track coilovers, and a lightweight flywheel from the RS 4.0. We've reviewed this car on the channel twice before. I love this vehicle. I fell in love with it. Hydraulic steering. The 997 GTs are some of my all-time favorite cars. And the funny thing between these three examples is they kind of double in price as you go. So this one's gonna go for around 140K-ish on the used market. The RS 3.8 is gonna go around 300-ish. And the 4.0 is 600-ish. So the question is, when you double your money, how much more car do you get? They only made about 2,400 of these, and they get rarer and rarer as you go up the food chain. And what's crazy to me is that this is the least special engine. We have a 3.6 liter flat six pushing out 415 horsepower, 299 pound-feet of torque. That's a specific output of 115 horsepower per liter. These are rated around 3,075 pounds, but this example is going to be weighing in actually probably closer to 3,150. And that flywheel, you can see as it chatters as you let go of the clutch, even at idle. We put this into sport mode. Helps with throttle response and opens up that exhaust. Oh my God. It's crazy to me, this is the baseline. 997, last generation of Porsche 911 to have hydraulic steering. And you can feel quite a bit. Keep in mind, this has PS4S rubber. Not the best tire when it comes to communication of steering, but it's still pretty good with this hydraulic rack. Getting a good amount of texture, and the 997, you still feel that rear engine. You still feel, as you load up the front, it turns in sharper. As you get on the throttle, you can feel the front end lighten up if you get really heavy on the throttle on low speed corners. The brakes here, Ferodo DS2500s, I have a lot of experience with them, and they're okay pads. I don't think they do this car justice. Not as sharp of an initial bite. There's like, they are marketed as dual duty, and that's how I used them when I had my FRS. They don't hold up well on track and on street as well. There's better brake options out there. The Öhlins road and track, it's quite compliant, and this car feels very race car. The clutch is so incredibly heavy. You're getting a foot workout or leg workout every time you clutch in, which I like. I think that's part of the experience of driving a GT3. And even the effort for this manual transmission, thank you so much. This has the least impressive engine, which is insane because it's still such an impressive engine. Using this manual transmission, high effort, nice and notchy. It has that distinct Porsche quality to the throws. Very similar to the kind of movement and the action of it is very similar to the 987, where it feels like it has a high degree of angle change as you go between gears. But things are pretty tight, pretty well defined. That lighter flywheel is making rev matching even easier. Immediate throttle response. Oh, we love that. We love that. The road and track coilovers you know, it doesn't quite feel congruent with the rest of the vehicle. It feels a little bit softer. It's much more compliant than stock. Last time I drove this car, it didn't have the road and track. Everything else on this car feels more race car, feels more hardcore. The sound, the NVH, the weight to everything, right? Even the steering, everything's a little bit more race car. And then the suspension is kind of soft, kind of compliant. I mean, the body control is still good, and it's not bad. It just doesn't fit the character of the rest of the car. It's not completely congruent with what you'd expect a GT3 to behave like behind the wheel. To heel toe, immediate throttle response, good pedal placement. Oh, there's that DC2. Yeah, these brakes aren't inspiring as much confidence as Porsche brakes normally do. But I love how lightweight these are. I mean, 3,100 pounds in the grand scheme of things. Some may argue not lightweight enough, but compared to modern vehicles, it just feels so nimble still. Nature there, and that's part of the fun, that's part of the charm of these cars. And the 996, you feel it even more. Every generation it gets tuned out more and more, and the 997 to me is one of the best driving 911s because of the analog nature, that hydraulic steering. It feels raw, it feels special, it still feels RR. With the newer gens, with the 992s, especially with the rear steer, you don't feel that RR bias nearly as much. Wow, very high bar to set. Next up, we're gonna hop into the 997.2 GT3 RS 3.8 liter. And now it's time for the 997.2 GT3 RS. They only made about 2,000 of these, and the going price now is around $300,000, about double of the prior. Now, first off, .2, different taillights. I think these look better. Also, the wider hips. The .2 GT3 RS 3.8 and the 4.0, they have the turbo, the wider body in the rear, which is nice. Makes room for the wider track, front and rear, compared to the .1 GT3. And for the front, they have these fender flares they've added. But on the 4.0, we have more carbon here, carbon fenders, carbon hood. And you'll see that the fender here is actually a single piece molded together, unlike on the 3.8. But we'll get to that shortly. Totally stock, except for Akrapovic exhaust, which owner thinks adds maybe 10, 20 horsepower-ish. This is now a 3.8 liter flat six, up from 3.6. So each jump we have a 0.2 liter from 3.6 to 3.8, 3.8 to 4.0. And this is now making 444 horsepower, 317 pound-feet of torque. 117 horsepower per liter. Everything else stock. We do have carbon ceramic brakes. In terms of weight, these are rated around 3,020 pounds. Owner thinks it's about 3,070. Over the GT3, we have a lighter weight exhaust. We also have a lithium-ion battery to save quite a bit of weight over the GT3's acid battery. Getting in, we got Alcantara everywhere. Ooh, she breathes to life. Carbon buckets, nice and supportive. I'm digging this plaid, or whatever you call this pattern of the fabric in the middle. And familiar place to be. Now, driving this here, I felt like this is quite a bit faster than the 997.1 GT3. And I think part of that is the 13% shorter final drive. That really helps with the acceleration. I'm gonna put this in sport mode. Oh yeah, it feels a lot quicker. We're still on PS4S rubber, but everything in this vehicle is just dialed up. I don't like the pedals. There's some aftermarket spacer on the throttle that helps with heel toe, and it's just unnatural, and it actually makes it a little bit harder for those who are used to regular pedals to heel toe appropriately. But you gotta love this engine. The last Metzger engine, technically in the 4.0 is the last one, but these Metzger engines, they're so special. These are derived from the 90s GT1 911 race car, which is based on the 962 Cup car Group C from the 1980s. You know, a lot of people are obsessed with the whole air-cooled and versus water-cooled, and I mean, I think this is peak Porsche engine. Throttle response is actually, it's almost like a too sensitive. I keep over revving it, bit of a learning curve. Oh yeah, there we go. Steering here, quite a bit sharper and more communicative. Ooh, yes. Than that 997.1 GT3. This also is more playful, or what should I say? It's a little bit more lively. When I get on the throttle, I can actually feel the nose step out a little bit and tuck back in based on how I'm modulating the throttle, which makes me think that could be related to possibly more aggressive LSD. I'm not sure. But keep in mind, I was driving on sport mode. With sport mode disengaged, that changes the exhaust as well as the throttle response. Throttle response not as over boosted, overly sensitive as with it engaged. Suspension here is way more congruent, getting all the communication that you want from the chassis. It's not overly stiff, it's not uncomfortable, but it's communicative, it's sporty, it's controlling the body even better, of course, than in that .1 GT3. And the brakes as well, far more congruent and confidence-inspiring. You have that initial bite that you expect from a Porsche GT car. Essentially, the step from the 3.6 to the 3.8 is bigger than I thought. This feels substantially quicker, and granted, you know, there is a power bump, but it's also that shorter final drive ratio. The suspension, the brakes, I mean, those are also not OEM on the GT3. But everything here feels a little bit sharper and a little bit more dialed in, a little bit sportier, if that makes sense. The way the car wiggles and plays a little bit under braking and even on throttle, it just feels sharper. But not sharper in like the Cayman GT4 RS way, where everything is just super balanced, precise. It's sharper while also being a little bit more lively. Does that make sense? It doesn't feel like a stability monster like that GT4 RS does. It feels like if you don't know what you're doing, this is gonna rip your face off. The way you feel it wiggling under braking, and the way that it actually moves with you under throttle as well. The transmission here also feels a little bit heavier, a little bit, the clutch is pretty similar. But the transmission here feels even better, a little bit tighter. Granted, this one has 17,000 miles, quite a bit less than the GT3. But this has got to be the best manual transmission, best shifter I felt from a 997, 987, that kind of generation of Porsche up until this point. lighter and crisper than that .1 GT3. So for an extra 150K, doubling the price of the .1 GT3, do you get twice the car? Obviously not. But you are getting quite a bit more car for that extra money. This does feel like it has a bit of that extra magic with the RS. It's actually a bigger difference than I was expecting. And finally, the granddaddy, the 997.2 GT3 RS 4.0. Only made about 600-ish of these worldwide. And to get one today, you're paying around $600,000 on the low end to $1 million. That is how valuable these cars are. The big thing to note here is that the 4-liter up from the 3.8, they got that by increasing the stroke from 76 to 80 millimeters. And now we're pushing out 493 horsepower at 8,250 RPM and 339 pound-feet of torque at 5,750 RPM. I mean, what a way to send off the 997 and the last Metzger power unit. Such a special engine, and you're gonna find out why very shortly. We have these BBS aftermarket forged wheels wrapped in Cup 2 tires, unlike the PS4S of the prior two cars. This car is a monster. It's now down to 3,000 pounds. Technically, it's like 2,998 or something. The owner says probably closer to actually 3,030, but very lightweight considering the power. I mean, 0 to 60 on this, it's rated at 3.8, but magazines have tested this at 3.4. Which, if that doesn't impress you, keep in mind, this is a manual transmission, all right? Manual only, no PDK, no launch control. Same carbon fiber rear wing as in the 3.8, but it has a sharper angle of attack, more downforce. We also have these front canards to help with the downforce in the front. We have carbon fiber fender, carbon fiber hood. We have aluminum doors. A lot of weight savings here to keep that weight as close to 3,000 pounds as possible. They went so far with weight savings, they even put the Porsche sticker here rather than the metal emblem to save weight. Although you could argue that the extra stripes here add and kind of counter some of that weight savings. They even have plastic windows here, again to save weight. And the car only came in 2 shades, black and white. Pruninger said white was his favorite because it makes the car look innocent, which I think is absolutely hilarious. I love that. We're gonna be very careful here. This car costs about similar value to my house. So we're gonna make sure we don't scuff up anything. Getting in. Oh, she breathes to life. Now, specific output on this engine, it makes more power than before, right? So this is making quite a bit more power than the 3.8, 493. And how do they do that? Primarily from increasing the displacement from 3.8 to 4. But also they've opened up the intake and the exhaust. And let me show you. We'll double clutch that in a second. Sport mode. You gotta love that metallic motorsports inspired sound, especially as you reach red line. I mean, they even have these dynamic engine mounts that stiffen up mid-corner so that your engine and transmission, they're essentially rigid with the chassis. Wow! Front end much sharper than that 3.8. Part of that is going to be the tires, but they've also made suspension changes. Not having the same issue with throttle response in this car versus the 3.8. I wonder why. Either the throttle response here is not as touchy, a little bit more natural, or I'm just used to it now. Even better front end feel from this over the 3.8. Again, part of that's going to be tire, but you get a lot more communication through the steering wheel. It feels just, the step from the 3.6 to the 3.8 is like the step from the 3.8 to the 4.0. Sharper front end, look at that. A little bit twitchy even. Really darty. Every little input you give it, you got to be really precise with your inputs because anything you do with the steering wheel, it's going to listen and the rear end follows suit. It's like the car wants to rotate with you as you turn in. It wants to make your job easier. And with that throttle, you can still control the nose like I was saying earlier, part of that is going to be from LSD, but a big part of that is also just the RR layout. You can still feel the RR bias and weight balance in the 997 generation. Transmission here, just like the 3.8, super tight, pleasure to use. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. This feels like a proper race car. Those other two already felt like race cars compared to an average car, but as you step it up, this gets more and more hardcore, more and more motorsport. Even the way the engine sounds, that metallic note at the top end, they use this this conical air filter that helps with that induction note. Get this beautiful metallic sound. One thing that's interesting is the brakes here feel a little bit different from modern Porsches. Modern Porsches have this really firm, almost too grabby nature when you first get on them. It's something that you get used to. I personally enjoy them. Here it's a little bit more gradual as you step in, and then it gets that really firm bite, which I don't think is a problem, just something to note. It's a little bit more of a generational thing that you have with the 997s versus the 992s. Thank you, sir. Downshift. Wow, getting a lot of communication from that front end. I can feel, I'm reading the texture of the road. It's like Braille. And the way it changes as you load up those front wheels. Beautiful, beautiful steering. Really miss the steering from the 997 generation. The last hydraulic rack on a 911. And in this highest form, it is so, so good. Yes, please. The suspension is so dialed, it's firm, it's very much race car, but look at how it's damped over these bumps. Single compression, communicative. On some of these larger bumps, you can tell it's a bit much. The car starts to get a little bit unsettled. It's so sharp, it's so race car. But this car does inspire a lot of confidence. It's a bit intimidating. I mean, part of that's the price, but also the weight and the power, and how much it moves underneath you based on your inputs. Your steering, throttle, and brakes all get this thing to dance a little bit, more so than the other two. Ooh, short shifted that just for an excuse to use this beautiful transmission. Input, you feel the whole car move. You have to be very precise. Holy crap, guys. This is peak, pinnacle 911. Arguably the best engine. This Metzger 4.0, the send-off, this highest version of the 997. This to me is driving perfection, driving nirvana. This is what I want. This manual transmission, this chassis dynamic, this steering, these inputs, this power to weight ratio, 127 horsepower per liter. That's a very high specific output. My God. My God. such an occasion to get behind the wheel. It's eager, it wants to dance, it wants to play, it wants to rotate with you. Any steering input, I feel it so much. This is such a sharp front end. So precise. This is one of those cars, and I can say this because I actually did plastic surgery. The front end is surgically precise. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Wow. Holy shit. At each step, from 3.6 to 3.8 to 4.0, you feel these cars get more motorsport, more hardcore, more race car. And this to me is peak Porsche. The way this thing handles, how sharp it is, I would love to see this thing pushed on the track because you can just tell it's gonna feel at home there. Even on these canyon roads, it is a riot. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity. Big thanks to Kevin, the owner, Jimmy, the owner of the other two, and Fenton Sun, Zygreen YouTube channel, making this review possible. What a special treat. It's funny because the 991 and 992, this car isn't that old in the grand scheme of things, but this almost becomes like a classic now because you don't have, no 911 gives you steering that is this satisfying anymore. No 911 gives you an engine that is that special. I mean, the 4.0 and the 992, amazing engine, don't get me wrong, but it's not this Metzger 4. It doesn't have that same character and note. One thing the owner Kevin was telling me is that it's so special to have a front end like this that is organically created from a hydraulic rack. A lot of these modern cars, artificially fast steering ratios, E-Pass, and here it is so precise, so sharp. You need to be so meticulous with your inputs, and that's all organically done with this hydraulic rack and the geometry and the suspension and the tuning. And that level of precision I love because it's throughout the car. It's very congruent. Even the clutch feel, very precise. You know exactly when it's engaging. The throws here with your shifter, very precise as well. Everything just feels dialed in. Even the throttle here feels a little bit more appropriate and dialed in and precise than in the 3.8. My friends, let me know what do you think of the 997 GT3 RS 4.0 with a comment down below. Check out Jubbal on Cars if you want your car reviewed. Much love, and see you all in the next one.